Hi there, everyone. I'm Catherine Sayo, and I'm the founder and director of Lipedema Simplified and Lipedema Project with two of my favorite people, Carrie Reedy and Jill Harvey. Hi, Carrie. Hi, Jill.
Hi.
We have been, and let me say hi to Cheryl and Juanetta, and is that Roseanne? And is that Rayanne? Welcome from Alaska and Wisconsin and Colorado, and more people are coming in. And Jane from Newfoundland. So we have people from all around the world. It's pretty amazing. I am always amazed. And I love our community so much. Well, I am thrilled that we have been looking for ways to support everyone in the community since so many people have asked. And so we just started a new program, which is from the Coaching Collaborative. Carrie and Jill have spent a lot of amazing effort pulling this together, and it's fabulous. And it's really looking at nutrition specific for lipedema and lymphedema. And there is a program starting up. Carrie will tell you about it. And today is like an introduction. It's a free webinar so that you can see if it's something that you're interested in. And even just this free webinar will give you more than I ever got about nutrition before I started delving into this. And one of the things, and Carrie and Jill will tell you a little more about the program itself, is that we wanted something affordable. And so I figured it out. And you guys you're charging very little because it's like $30 a session, which is very little for an hour of coaching. But anyway, we'll keep it as what it is for now. But in the meantime, I'm gonna let you guys take it away. And for those of you listening, I'm so glad you're here. And if you have any questions, be sure to put it in the chat and we'll do the best we can to answer all of them.
Sounds wonderful. Sounds absolutely wonderful. So let's just get started. For those of you that may not know Jill and I, now you've got lots of pictures of us, but we are both very qualified nutritionists. We both live like a low carb ketogenic lifestyle. So we have lots of experience in various different nutritional interventions. We know what works for us, and hopefully as we move through our presentation today, we can talk about how we've worked that out and how we would encourage you to do the same. We both come from a holistic background, so we look at health and well-being from that holistic perspective rather than just thinking it's one thing or another. We like to look at people holistically, and we like to look at interventions for our health holistically. And we've been hanging around this group for a while, haven't we, Jill? We've been I think it's probably 18 months, maybe even coming up towards 2 years, but we've been involved with the lipedema community, and both of us are really passionate, aren't we, about really making a difference for people.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to say we've got a whole lot more people in. Laurie from Alabama and someone from Melbourne. We've got a question, is it going to be recorded? Yes. So we've got Irene from New Zealand. So people from all around the world. But yes, and as we are all discovering together in the world of lipedema and lymphedema, is that sometimes the challenges begin even with getting a diagnosis. So, and without the diagnosis, it will be hard to move forward. And even then with a diagnosis, sometimes the options that are presented to us, there is, I think we need to just put it out there that there is a school of thought around the world where the only interventions, especially for lipedema, are surgical, that being gastric banding for obesity treatment. And we know that lipedema is just not your average obesity. It's a very specific and it's its own condition. And the other one is the liposuction or liposuction. So there is that school of thought that the only options available to women who have a diagnosis are surgical options. But we've certainly found, and there is a growing body of evidence, that there are so many conservative measures that can really benefit the condition. We can feel a lot better in ourselves. Pain is very much part of this condition, and certainly pain, inflammation and edema, and certainly from a dietary point of view, and this is the whole point of why we're here, there's a lot that we can do to benefit ourselves. And I think what most of us would hope for is a very dramatic slowing of progression, because, you know, this is a condition that can progress over life and lead to some significant health challenges, including mobility challenges.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that, you know, it strikes me, and now that I've spoken to so many others with this condition, is the degree of confusion.
Yeah.
Because of all of the different approaches that are suggested, and you can end up feeling like, you know, that brain going, what? I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do first. And you're right, so many options, and what's the right first step? You know, we're going to have people listening to this that are brand new to the diagnosis. There's some that have known about the condition for a long time and are already doing all sorts of things, all of these conservative practices, all of these other things. But it still can be fraught with confusion, because it's still, I suppose, in many ways relatively unknown. I think someone just put in the chat, you know, how do I find a practitioner? I can't find one. Well, we're in Australia, so, you know, reach out to us.
I can tell you good ones in Melbourne.
We can point you in the right direction.
Yes.
It is about having a whole team of people around you to help support you with this. But one of the things that during COVID, our family did a lot of jigsaw puzzles. I don't know. I don't think I'd ever done that many in my life.
We did too. And it's cool because Hugh Jackman does jigsaw puzzles too.
Oh, I feel like I'm in
there
great
you go.
company.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know, that feeling of when you open the box of a jigsaw puzzle and you lay all the pieces out and you're like, what the heck, where do I even start? You know, and I think about, you know, getting a lipedema diagnosis, it can feel the same. You know, there's all of these pieces to the puzzle, and it's like, where do I even start? What do I do first? Who do I find first? What do I implement first? And one of the things about jigsaw puzzles is everyone has a different strategy. So you're welcome to put in the chat what your strategy is, but this is what our family does.
Edges and corners.
Yes, edges and corners, for sure. We sort them out, we find the corners, we put all the edges in a pile. We then end up with a big mound of middle pieces, which over time we sort of sort again into smaller piles, and we'll tackle little bits and pieces at a time. But the first thing that we need to do is, like you said, get the corners. And, you know, there's probably some, you know, different people have a different sort of way of looking at this, but I see the corners in terms of this lipedema puzzle is all of those physical therapies, things like wearing compression garments, manual lymphatic drainage, you know, various other physical therapy approaches, you know, pneumatic pumping, all of these sorts of things. And there's certainly an important place for these. Having some like a therapist on board that can support you with these aspects is really important in your lipedema and lymphedema journey. We also have the stress reduction and mind-body approaches piece, because this condition or these conditions play a lot with our head. You know, they really do add a whole load of extra stress to what's going on. We know that we need to sort of at some point tackle some of these things. Right now in the lipedema community, we're running a body peace coaching program, which is really being very beneficial in helping us address some of this, because many of us have been at war with our bodies for a long time. We also have the lifestyle practices. You know, we talk a lot about moving our bodies so that we can move our lymph around, and that's really vitally important as well. And then the piece up on the top right-hand corner is these dietary practices. And I just, right at the beginning of this, please, when you see dietary, don't just focus on the diet piece. You know, many of us in this community have really just over and over and over been through these diet processes, these diet cycles. When we're talking about dietary practices here, we're really talking about the way that we eat. So, put that out of your mind, that we're, really, we're not focusing on specifically short-term interventions and diets. What we're talking about here in terms of these everyday dietary practices, just what we're doing each and every day in terms of our food choices. What we really have come to understand about lipedema is there is a response, there is a connection between the food that we're eating and things like our pain and things like progression and swelling and all of these other things. So it's a really important piece. And of course, as Jill and I are nutritionists, and been around this community for a while, we know about all of these other pieces, but this is our piece, isn't it? This is the one that we get really geeky about talking about. So yeah, that's what we're going to time today talking about. And I'll hand it over to you, because there's lots of different recommendations made, aren't there, about how we can intervene in terms of diet.
Yes. So, and what's really interesting, especially when we look at something, so there's an acronym WOE, which sounds woeful, but it's actually very positive. We call it way of eating. So we take that word diet away, but in terms of dietary practices, so it's just the way we eat every day. And as Carrie alluded to, for us, it's so important that the way of eating that we choose is sustainable, lifelong. Carrie and I have chosen to be low carb or keto for the rest of our lives. And really interesting, I think a huge challenge that really has to be tackled as part of making any way of eating sustainable is that we need to deal with hunger. And I think so many of us have done the classic, to me, it's like archetypally 80s, like it goes with the leotard and the leg warmers and the whole low fat. And I guess that's when the whole low fat world really exploded around us. And I think it's important that we recognize how that came to be. Sadly, there is a strong thread of evidence which was actually based on academic fraud, which is no small thing. And the fact that, this way of eating has impacted people, but especially women, for now we're coming up to 2 generations. So, no small thing. So that was really based on the idea that because fat had a lot of calories, fat was bad. And this, it's called energy balance, or the other word we refer to is keto, which is calories in, calories out. Now, for better or for worse, the body is massively more complex and miraculous, really, than, I call this also the Thomas the Tank Engine. Like, you put wood or coal or oil in and it runs a boiler and makes steam, and Thomas the Tank Engine runs. But the interesting thing about us and our human bodies is the things we put it actually become integrated within our body. All these vitamins and minerals and other compounds that are within the food actually become part of our body and become part of the maintenance, repair and function of every cell. So we can see that, and that's another really interesting thing about this modern way of eating, which we call SAD, which either stands for the Standard American or Australian diet. If you live in a country that doesn't start with A, it doesn't work quite as nicely. But it is all part of
the West.
Yeah, exactly. But when we call it the sad way of eating, because it has ended up for many of us being quite sad. And what we find with this is that it has become a very energy dense. So we're actually overfed with energy, but we're actually underfed with these precious micronutrients, being vitamins, minerals. So here there's all sorts of diets that are talked about in relation specifically to lipedema and lymphedema. What's really interesting, I find the Mediterranean diet a really interesting beast. There are 22 countries surrounding the Mediterranean. Just which one are we talking about? Interestingly, when we start looking at the Middle East and North Africa, they've actually got some of the fastest rates of metabolic disease. So if we choose that type of Mediterranean diet, is this the diet that's inducing metabolic disease? Certainly quite grain. And I know that, well, because there's a huge Persian community where I live, their sweets are amazing. But, you know, treat food should be for high days and feast days, not for every day. And I think this is part of the problem. So, and again, from a Mediterranean perspective, very sadly, Mediterranean kids, and in this definition, it is Greek and Italian kids, are now the fattest and sickest in Europe, sadly. So whatever that interpretation of the Mediterranean diet, which again, I interpret as very grain heavy, lots of pizza and pasta, that is not working out for people. So when we talk Mediterranean diet, this is a very traditional Mediterranean diet. And again, a lot of it is the lifestyle that wraps around that diet. So unprocessed foods. So the theme we see around this is most of these dietary interventions are going to remove a significant amount of processed food out of it. And, you know, the modern, I guess we'll call it junk food, is ultra processed and ultra palatable. So, and in processing, we strip out all these precious micronutrients. So, and I think the other thing is that I think, Carrie, you'd find the same time and time again. We see that many people, but especially women and especially older women, are not meeting their protein requirements. And that's probably, if we look at the derivation, again, a Mediterranean from the ancient Proteus, of primary importance. So protein is the first thing, the most important thing that we've got to get into ourselves. We're going to go into keto in a little bit more detail, aren't we? So I'm not going to go into the specifics of why, because I know we've got some other things. We'll talk about that in a minute. For us, keto is the one that, yeah.
Sorry, someone did ask what RAD stands for, and I just want to say it's the rare adipose. Oh, someone else has responded. Rare adipose disorder diet. In many ways, there's sort of been a number of different dietary interventions that have been recommended for lipedema over time, and I think it started by saying no food or dietary interventions help, and then the RAD diet, this rare adipose disorder diet, was initially recommended. You know, probably going back sort of 10 years ago, people were talking about this. This is very plant heavy, very they avoided red meat. You know, there was a various different thoughts about why this was beneficial. More recently, we've been talking about the Mediterranean diet, and as you've alluded, it's not pizza and pasta, it's the traditional Mediterranean diet, the anti-inflammatory diet, and keto. And I guess, you know, what this slide really depicts is, you know, all of them have some different aspects that are beneficial. And if you were to try to do all of them at once, heck, you'd be eating about 3 foods. I think Jill and
I actually did do a spreadsheet once. I was comparing keto, carnivore, the histamine diet, and maybe paleo. And I just wrote sort of groups of foods like dairy. Is it in? Is it out? It's in for carnivore. It's out for paleo. Histamine, it's out if it's fermented. So if we're trying to bundle everything together in one, and it's interesting because there's still actually some carnivore foods. So this is, you know, lots of foods that have been excluded that would then be excluded on other diets. Like a person on a histamine diet then has to exclude any processed meat or you know, fermented products. So even though that they might be animal based, that immediately once that processing has happened, it's off the menu. So yeah, this is what we're sort of saying, is that if you're trying to navigate your way through trying to incorporate bits of all of these, I think it's going to end up feeling quite complicated. And no wonder it's confusing, because when we said, oh, this one's good for you, no, that one's good for you, meat is inflammatory, no, grains are inflammatory, it's why. And I think this is why I love working with Carrie, is that I think we've very much both got this belief, is that we want to tackle things from first principles. Why is it inflammatory? What's the science behind that? What does the research tell us? Is this robust research? And is this worth perpetuating? Is this helpful to people? So, you know, we're very much there from first principles, and very much from evidence base as well.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it needs to be said that all of these changes, you know, whatever intervention you make, if you're moving away from that standard Western way of eating, will have some benefits, won't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, the irony is the Western way of eating 2, 3, 4 generations ago was very different to what it's evolved to today. Although we do have to remember that there are undercurrents, like for those of us who've had, you know, family members who've lived through wars and times of deprivation and I think this is sometimes when this bias slips in, that it's like, oh, well, it's all very grains. And there comes to a time when, you know, your country's at war, grains is all you've got left. So, you know, that then becomes the bias in the diet. You know, people are shocked when I say to them, there was a time before potatoes in Ireland. There was a time before tomatoes in Italy, because these foods all came out of the exploration of the New World. So, you know, once we start looking back ancestrally, it's a very different picture what was eaten, because there just was no capacity to process foods.
And things were eaten seasonally. There's a whole lot of benefits to thinking, you know, taking principles from a lot of these different interventions and personalizing to ourselves. And we'll certainly come back to, you know, the importance of personalizing all of this. But, you know, one of the questions that people actually, you know, regularly say to me was like, well, where do I start? And I think that, you know, no matter where you are, whether you've been, you know, doing all sorts of interventions up to this point, or whether you're right at the beginning, you've just received a diagnosis, it's important for us to acknowledge it's not a straightforward path. There's a lot of ups and downs, a lot of learning about ourselves, learning about the way that food and various different interventions impact us. I think, you know, where we start with this journey really depends on what our goals are, what the most pressing aspects of our health concerns are, what other coexisting conditions we have along the way, you know, food intolerances, various different aspects like this will determine exactly how we sort of intervene with these sorts of things. But as nutritionists and having worked in this community, you know, we suggest that of all of these different interventions that you start with a ketogenic way of eating. And that's because we have found it makes the most difference the most quickly. Those words feel like they were jumbled as they came out of my mouth. But what we see with keto, what we see is that people's energy level increases. And we know that fatigue's a huge piece in things like lipedema and lymphedema for a variety of different biochemical reasons. So getting more energy always is welcome. We tend to have less cravings. And again, anyone that's been on that diet hamster wheel will know that you can white knuckle through dietary interventions for a while, but eventually those cravings just kind of rear their, you know, ugly head, and it all sort of goes pear-shaped. Typically what we find with keto is that those cravings just settle right down. For some, they go away completely. For others, they just settle down to something that they can manage. We tend to be able to move away from this diet mindset that many of us have been, you know, going through for a long time. We can enjoy food again. A ketogenic way of eating, because we have more fat in the food, we want to focus on having plenty of flavor in that food. It has a nice feel in our bodies as we're eating it. It can feel good. Clothes feel more comfortable. You know, people do get body composition changes, less inflammation, less pain, less swelling. And with all of those benefits comes this more hope, you know, that this greater sense of hope and a greater sense of well-being moving forward. And to us in this community, that in and of itself is worth the effort to intervene. But Jill, you're going to talk a little bit about sort of some of the why this works.
Yeah, I think some of the three key factors why keto for me is really the best option for lipedema and lymphedema is keto is naturally diuretic. For those of us with lipedema and lymphedema, edema is a big deal. It makes us very uncomfortable. There are many factors that, you know, influence this, not least even things like weather. You know, those hot, humid days, it's sort of like, oh, you know, the legs just suddenly, all the fluid is accumulated. But so for me, it's fantastic that this is a naturally diuretic diet. It encourages to move that fluid out of our body, which is really powerful. And that will also affect things like pain. So, you know, just that pain of having the tight, full tissue and the stress on the skin, which again, because so many people in this community have got the disordered connective tissue, of which skin is part of that very delicate skin as well. So the other things also is, for me, as much as there are other diets out there claiming to be anti-inflammatory, one of the most inflammatory substances that we can ever have running through our body is glucose. Now, so that's going to be all the things that we recognize as sugar, all the things that are on the back of the packet that are sugar disguised as something else. You know, what was it? Evaporated coconut nectar is still sugar, right? But it sounds, you know, and especially when it's like organic evaporated coconut nectar. And what's really interesting is that would probably be quite high in fructose as well. So, but one of the most inflammatory substances have going circulating around us is glucose. And the other thing that we forget is that all these starchy foods, what starch is a chain of glucose. When we eat it, we cleave that chain. And so we once again have glucose. So toast becomes glucose, pasta becomes glucose, potato becomes glucose, rice becomes glucose. And we see that every traditional cultural food around the world has got those basic starchy foods. And I view them as survival foods. They're the sort of foods where if you didn't bring in the kill for the day, you know, back in the days of our ancestors, sort of like, oh, well, I guess we'll chew on this bit of grass, the seeds on the end, and we'll get a little bit of protein, but nothing like when you bring down a woolly mammoth. And so the anti-inflammatory, and of course, when we're inflamed, that brings on another aspect of edema as well. So that's really important. So naturally diuretic, naturally anti-inflammatory, which is fantastic. And the hormonal regulation, it's interesting. I think insulin's one of these hormones that it's got its finger in every other pie, and that if it can help us, once we regulate insulin better, it's interesting how many other hormones just sort of fall into line. And I did notice somebody made a comment about cortisol. Cortisol indirectly increases insulin. Insulin is just a direct response to having glucose. And our body says, I've got to regulate this because if the glucose gets too high, it will damage me, which is the complications we see in diabetes. So, but the cortisol will elevate our blood glucose because it's getting ready for us to fight the saber-toothed tiger. And it's giving us energy. But when we've then got this circulating glucose, which we circulated ourselves out of our own supplies, we're then going to have insulin to bring it back down when we don't need it. So, and the interesting thing is, again, I think we've got to tackle fat phobia, really, and that came about in the 70s and 80s. Ancestrally, fat is a really, really precious resource. It's the precursor to the building blocks of so many neurotransmitters and hormones. All our sex hormones are based on cholesterol. Our brain is 2/3 fat, of which a really significant component of that is cholesterol. So, I know that the orthodox view is that saturated fat and cholesterol are all of concern, but I think we have to look at what our big ticket items are, and we have to look at how robust the evidence is behind those claims. So again, the interesting thing in terms of it was thought that fat wasn't helpful to lymph flow, but we're now seeing the newer research is showing that it is actually helpful for that. So, you know, that's actually an exciting whole new area of research that's opening up there. Is there anything I've forgotten, Carrie?
No, but it does, you know, that last point about, you know, fat being very beneficial for lymph flow actually makes us wonder about those, you know, 2 generations that have been focusing on lowering fat intake in our diet. Have we in many ways, because we've been following this I guess, societal-based intervention about lowering our fat, have we actually created some lymphatic impairment over that time? You know, time will tell as we come to understand these things, but certainly lots of really positive benefits from lowering our carbohydrates, and hence, focusing more on the fat and the protein. We have so many great questions in the chat. Please know that we will get to them. What we'll do is we'll work through a couple more slides, and at the end we'll sort of come back around as time permits to answer some of these. If there's any that we notice after we've got off the call we haven't responded to, we'll post some responses to those in the Keto for Lipedema and Lymphedema Facebook group, because I can see lots of awesome questions there. Now, we just wanted to share with you, often one of the things that come up is people say to me, oh, but there's no research to show this. There is a lot of anecdotal research. People in this community that have intervened in this way are raving about it. I did see someone post a comment that they've been doing keto for just a few weeks and they've noticed that their swelling in their ankles is down. So that, that's what people are seeing, that they're seeing these really positive changes. There has been some, I guess, academic research in terms of this intervention that I imagine will continue to grow as more looking at this as a way of intervening. But there was some research published in 2021. I was about to say last year in 2021. Is anyone else having the same?
Yeah.
Going, oh, what year are we? But this was published in 2021, and this was just a case study of one individual, a lady. She was 32 years old. She was a stage 2 to 3 lipedema. She intervened with a ketogenic diet. They followed her for just shy of 2 years. During that time, she lost 45 kilos, or somewhere around that 90 pounds. She also saw all sorts of improvements in terms of her pathology results, so metabolic markers. She experienced less lipedema-related pain. She felt that her quality of life had improved. And what she said, particularly about this intervention, that she thought was beneficial, is she said it was easy to comply with. It helped her feel more inclined to move because she had more energy. She had better glycemic control, which is that blood sugar control, and she had way less inflammation in her body. So, yes, just one person. But, Jill, you were going to share some of the research in Norway. This is a slightly bigger group.
Exactly. So in another case study, participants lost weight. They experienced less pain. And this, unsurprisingly, improved their quality of life. Interestingly, after they finished the ketogenic phase, participants were put back on a higher carb diet. They didn't regain the weight they'd lost, but the pain did return to pre-keto levels within a few weeks. And that suggests that the pain relief from a ketogenic diet is not just purely due to weight loss itself. And we're starting to see that ketones are actually a really powerful fuel, and there's a growing body of evidence and school of thought that ketones may actually be the body and certainly our brains, the top computer that's driving our whole neurological system. And so we're seeing that maybe our neurons actually prefer to have ketones as their fuel and they run better. And certainly that's an element of a completely different condition. Alzheimer's is that a factor, it's very multifactorial, but one of the factors is that some people who have Alzheimer's have what we almost call an insulin-resistant brain. Their brain can't really fully utilize glucose anymore, and they get a lot of benefit out of their brain becoming a fat burner and having a different fuel source. So, and certainly I think when we're seeing that when keto benefits something, the benefit is primarily while you're keto. And I suspect if they tracked with this study after a few years, the people who went back to high carb probably eventually would experience that bounce back. Because I know certainly for me, one of the fantastic elements of keto, and this is what I alluded to earlier, is if you can have better control of something like hunger, then it's going to make it much more sustainable. And as soon as we're hungry all the time again, and as you say, we both use this thing of white knuckling it, just clinging on for dear life, going, I've just got to get, again, the diet mentality, I've just got to get through this for 6 weeks and then we'll have reached certain goals that I've set for myself. And then, of course, we see that so much part of the diet of so many of us is yo-yo dieting and this up and down and back and forth. And that's actually quite stressful for our bodies. So, if we can have a way of eating that's set and forget, that's going to be beneficial as well in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in terms of this research, like I said, it's ongoing. I think over time we'll see more and more research to show the benefits of ketogenic diets. But, with lipedema and lymphedema, we have to be at that leading edge. We have to be testing this out. And, one of the things that Catherine Sayer always says is where, N equals 1, where we are, we are an experiment of one. And, ultimately it's what works for us, rather than even what works for other people. So just a couple of comments that we've had from those that have participated in keto coaching programs through Lipedema Simplified. The first one was a lady that said, I've lost 74 pounds since I began last March and feel better at 40 than I have in my entire life. I've got more energy and no aches and pains. I'm thankful every day that I found keto. That to me is so powerful, right? That people are having these sorts of experiences.
And another one is, I'm sitting in economy class wearing Levi's jeans that I bought and never wore. They were purchased years ago. The keto way of eating is the only way. I did not fit in economy on American Airlines 2 years ago. I had to switch seats. This person is down 21 pounds in 8.5 weeks, and she says, I'm so happy I could cry. And I think it's sometimes quite emotional for us as we go through this journey. The thing we forget is we've unknowingly already been part of the low-fat experiment. And chances are, if you're our age, Carrie, you've been part of this experiment for your entire life. We've lived entirely under this low-fat paradigm. And for many, many of us, this experiment has not worked out. And this is what I just ask people. So, is the experiment that you're currently undertaking, without even knowing it, working out? How's it working out for you? And do we need to do something differently to get a different outcome? Yeah.
Yes.
And I think you've got one more testimonial.
Oh, yeah. This is just one more. Lady said, I'm 1 month in today and I'm down 20 pounds. But more importantly, I feel great. I've stopped completely my opiate medications, no random stomach aches that she used to get a lot, no headaches and migraines, which she also had frequently. The leg pain is much better. She doesn't feel so stiff. Her head feels clearer. Why didn't I do this sooner? And that's often the sorts of comments that we hear. It's not just about the weight loss. And whilst, many of us come to this thinking, well, I've got to do something about this lipedema weight, it's all of these other beautiful benefits that come along the way. For someone that's experienced lots of headaches and migraines, getting relief from those, just that makes a huge difference to, that quality of life and how we feel about things, for sure. Now, there's some people that it might not be quite right for right away, that they may need some additional support, right?
So I guess part of it is what we find is that so we talk about these actions with keto, that it's naturally diuretic. So if you are on diuretics are a common medication that's used for hypertension or high blood pressure. So because of this natural diuretic action of keto, we find that people's blood pressure can come down very nicely. It's a wonderful side effect of keto. But if you are on medication, and not just diuretics for high blood pressure, these may need to be reviewed and the dosage changed quite quickly with keto. Other medication is, if anyone's on medication for diabetes or to manage glucose levels. So that would be anything from insulin through to all the different ways. Now there's medications that make you pee it out. There's medications that make you do all sorts of different things. And some of them are a less good fit with keto, and those medications actually need to be changed before starting keto. Some of them may just need to be reviewed and reduced. And the other one I do see, which is interesting, is that I find quite commonly when people on antidepressants have a lot less glucose flowing through their system, their antidepressants can feel too strong quite quickly. So again, if you're on medications, be ready to have them reviewed within weeks. So people with type 1 diabetes, keto can work for them, and certainly glycemic control is fabulous in the people with type 1 who I see do take keto, but it has a degree of complexity, and there are things that affect type 1 that a little bit more nuanced. So you would want to have extra medical support for that. So again, because of so this whole mechanism of retaining salt and water is to do with our kidneys. So if a person has got renal impairment, again, just a bit of extra support and checking in with doctors. So being pregnant or breastfeeding to me is not a contraindication, but again, a little bit more care. And certainly for me, probably tapering in more gently. From my perspective, there is every benefit to be had from having a far less processed diet with much greater nutrient density. So this is vitamin, minerals, and other compounds that are of real use to our bodies. Again, with gallbladder disease, this is so the most common symptom with people with gallbladder disease is that they struggle to digest fat. And with keto, so interestingly, people, because we've been taught to be fat phobic, if we had a pie chart and we keep protein the same, when we take down that slice of the chart that is carbohydrates, immediately the fat slice gets bigger. So it's all a relative thing that, the fat is relatively higher, but if your gallbladder is either not functioning quite right or not even there, again, it's very much just a gentle tapering in and making sure that anyone with problems or without a gallbladder is comfortable and not having side effects. So again, underweight, part of that can be due to disordered eating. And, I have the detractors like to throw it around that keto is just disordered eating because it removes entire food groups being grained. But I sort of think if that seed is already there, it can happen in any type of diet. And again, we just have to be more gentle about the way we do that and make sure that the care team are all part of the process. But if you're unsure, reach out to us. Carrie and I are in all our Facebook groups. We have emails, which we will try and copy up at some stage. Just let us know and we'll help take you through that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I'm seeing so many brilliant questions come through.
I know. It's going to be a huge Q&A.
We certainly want to get back to you on all of those because they're really valid questions about, what's anti-inflammatory for me? Should I get some pathology run before? Certainly, these are things that we would encourage to explore. But really what we want to say at this point is the only way you'll know if keto works for you is to give it a go. Now, doesn't mean you have to, have something set in stone and be thinking this is it forever. If it works for you, then you probably do want to make it a way of life long term, right? But the only way that you will know whether this works is to actually give it a go because you are ultimately an experiment of one. What works for you may be different to what works for the next person. And the way that we approach this as nutritionists is we say, hey, let's just test it out. Let's just see. Think about it in terms of it's a short-term experiment. We're going to see how our body responds, and then we're going to tweak it from there. Someone's just commented about dairy or, these other things that are traditional ketogenic foods may still not be right for you based on your particular biochemistry. Maybe your body's flagged that as being an issue. It creates a lot of inflammation when you eat it. So we have to start somewhere. We say, let's start with, a ketogenic intervention, and then we have to play around with it. And that's really part of the process. There is no one size fits all way of doing keto, even though it's, recommended that way. Really, this is about us and what's right for us and how we're going to, in particular, go about it. So often what happens is at this point, our brains are saying, oh, yeah, that's great. I'm going to try this. And then that little voice on our shoulder says, no. Carbohydrates? No, I love my sugar. I can't possibly give it up. And I think it's really valid. We have been raised on that food pyramid where the grains are, right down the bottom, and those grains do turn into sugar.
They're not anymore in Australia. Our food pyramid got changed a few years ago, and the veggies are down the bottom and the grains are smaller now. So
yes.
Yeah, we have to, again, all this mentality that was inserted into modern, it's almost like modern folklore from the 80s. We still think of the 80s food pyramid and the leg warmers.
The thing is, we don't we don't necessarily, new interventions may come out, our government may say, oh, change this, but we may not know that it's been changed.
Yeah.
And,
the other thing, the other thing
Yeah.
also is that reading a statistic now, I don't know, it was either 13 or 17 years before something that is at the forefront of academic research actually makes it into public health policy. So we're talking half a generation. So the lag is huge. So this is part of the decision making that we all have to go through. I know the first time it was a neighbour of mine, and she was eating a keto diet, and she was having strawberries and cream for breakfast. For lipedema, maybe not. It's not quite on our green list, but I was going, wow, that's insane. Because to me, like eating lashings of cream for breakfast is like, how does this work? How can you lose weight? And it's interesting, once you start to know about that intricate biochemistry that underlies all these processes, like, I get it now. But it takes a while to come around from that fat phobia.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are lots of things that our brains will start throwing up. If you jump online, you start doing research, people, you might read that, oh, keto is really, bad for you, or all sorts of other things. But we'll talk about that. Roadblock 2. Jill, you've done this.
And guilty, including the crazy diet that involves effectively fasting for an entire month. Very low calorie diets. And interesting, because I didn't know when I tried that diet, and I won't name it, I didn't know what I know today. I could barely stand up by the end, and I didn't quite go the full month. I think I went about 3 weeks. I was so dizzy. And now I know that was my electrolytes being flushed out, and all I needed was electrolytes, and then I could have stayed standing without being all wobbly and dizzy. But and very much part of it is the yo-yo dieting too. And you sort of think, well, yeah, we know there's a lot of chatter out there about keto. First it was paleo. Somebody tracked the Google searches. It was paleo, and then keto's taken over from paleo, and I understand why. But it's like, well, why is this new and different and better than all the other things that were new and different, better before in my life that I tried, and they weren't new and different and better? So I guess part of it is, as Carrie and I, we've seen the benefits and experienced them every day. And for me, I'm in it for life. It's worth it. And like Carrie says, we've got to give it a go. So if this is the one last new great thing you try, do give it a go. From my perspective, it's totally worth it, but I get it in terms of all the things that didn't work. How do we know? But the only way we really try, the only way we really know is by giving it a go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we think about it in terms of, I'm going to do a short-term intervention and see how I respond, rather than this is my only hope, this is what I'm going to do. We can address that from a mindset point of view, of a place of curiosity, really, isn't it? I'm just curious how my body will respond to this, for sure. Now, the next roadblock that we often hear from people is, keto or low carb are unhealthy ways to eat. And this is in the media, this is on, in social media. I think keto and low carb can be unhealthy if we choose to do it in that way. But, this next slide, I just love this. I almost want to have a big poster on my wall. But, this is what people think. Our doctor thinks all we do is eat butter. Our friends think all we eat is meat. Our vegetarian friends are so freaked out about all that we're eating. Society just, and our colleagues think that it's all just focused on protein and fat. This last picture down in the corner is what we actually eat. And there are various interventions like carnivore that we may want to try at some point, which I guess makes this slide a bit laughable. But we do want to do keto in the most healthy, nutrient-dense, positive way that we possibly can. And, the last roadblock that people say
to totally.
Oh, goodness.
and it is, because everyone's got their way of doing. And I guess that's why for Carrie and I, we're absolutely rapt that the small group coaching is happening, is everybody, and those are two separate words, everybody is unique. And we've got, like, certainly for me, and I've been doing my own experiment. I know already that I can't drink an entire glass of milk without. Well, I did save my maternity underpants for a very, very long time because I was so bloated. It was almost like being 6 months pregnant after having a glass of milk or having a big dose of dairy yogurt. So no, and I was sort of kidding myself going, oh, you know, the high-fat dairy is lower in allergenic components. And I do see there are some questions about inflammation through allergies or food intolerances. So, you know, and we've got the keto that's out there, that's fathead pizza, that was basically a pizza base made out of 90% cheese. So, you know, when I eat fathead pizza, I pay for it. So that type of keto, the very dairy intense keto, doesn't work for me. And I'm confused because I'm told that keto is supposed to work, but that doesn't. I'm bloated and unhappy. So, and this is part of the thing of having this environment where you're traveling with people who've maybe a bit further down the path. I'm 10 years down the low carb or keto journey myself. So, and we've, like the song, the famous Australian Paul Kelly song, I've done all the dumb things. And we've done all the crazy experiments. And I guess part of it is, you know, our qualifications are such that I think Carrie and I both love the detective work of going, well, if this isn't working, and we look at the inputs and we look at the outputs, we talk a lot about poo a lot. And I know there's a comment about that yeah. So, you know, once you know what goes in, what comes out, we can do the detective work and have a pretty good idea of what's going on in between, and some of the things that we can use to troubleshoot that. So yes, it can be confusing, especially if we're trying to navigate our way between ourselves and the whole World Wide Web and all the information that's in it. And we've got to sift through it ourselves and, you know, just without any guidance at all. And that's what we're here for.
Absolutely. And, you know, this picture shows, you know, keto foods, you know, nuts and seeds, dairy, eggs, but some of these may not agree with you. And we do need to, you know, think about this as being what works for us personally rather than, you know, maybe what works for everyone else. And so, like we've said, we suggest, you know, starting with some sort of trial of a ketogenic way of eating, just seeing how our body responds. We actually start with our, you know, people that we're working with to help them implement this. We start by tracking, you know, look at your symptoms, make a note of what they are. And then 6 weeks later, as you've been doing this, look at your symptoms again and see what's changed, what's improved, so that you can work out how your body is responding. And then, you know, you can tweak from there. You know, one of the most important aspects of this to us, Jill, is to make this the most healthy, nutrient-dense version. And, you know, we've talked about this together, haven't we? You know, what people think keto is, what keto really is.
Yeah. And again, if we go back to those things, the healthy, taking out the processed food. So processing just wipes out nutrients. And then, you know, so by default, already much higher in nutrients and probably relatively actually not quite as high in empty calories, just that energy for nothing. And of course, you know, the interesting thing, and here's a tip for free for everyone, an obesogenic combination of foodstuffs is something that is high in carbohydrates, something also high in fats, and inevitably it is high in energy. And because it's processed, it's low in nutrients. So our body keeps on calling for more nutrients. And we perceive that as just hunger. I'm still hungry. It's like I'm hungry for nutrients. I'm not hungry. So for me, the classic food stuff, any junk food will fulfill this. And then you've got that extra layer of either sugar or salt to add to the addictive palatability of those junk foods. So classic pizza, high carb, high fat. So donuts, and especially it's got the yeast and the sugar and the highly refined flour, and then it's fried in oil and dipped in sugar. So, you know, if that's not an addictive food, actually when I started my first dietary intervention, and that was because of food intolerances, the thing I was addicted to and struggled to let go of was donuts. That was my kryptonite. So, yeah. So yeah. I think, it's healthy in so many ways.
Absolutely. And we do want to make it the healthiest possible version. Now, there's certainly some foods in that top picture that you can eat. I'm not saying that even though they're keto, they're bad, but, you know, we do want to balance this out and make it as healthy as possible, because ultimately we want this just to be sustainable. If it works and it helps with your pain and swelling, it stops any further progression of lipedema, then my gosh, we want to do this, you know, ongoingly, and we need to make it that way. And like we've said, we need to personalize this, you know, and this is often the missing piece when it comes to, you know, just downloading some plan off the internet and that you can't ask questions about, that you're just trying to follow it. You know, we think this really needs to be personalized to each individual so that we can make it work. And, you know, Jill, you do keto but dairy free, right? You found that dairy just really number on you. Yeah.
And the people in our group, so when we have our group, we have a Facebook group. I posted up that I created pizza, and I did want that bit of cheese. So I've put on almost half a kilo overnight. So that's interesting. And I did also post, and I said, it's going to be interesting. I'm not in a lot of pain, but I think that may determine whether I repeat the dairy input. I've got half of that pizza in the fridge. I don't know if I'm going to eat it or not, but I know it's so yummy that there's family members eyeing it off.
It actually sounds amazing. I saw your pictures. I was like, oh, that looks good.
I know.
So, you know, we've talked a lot at this point about testing out keto, seeing how keto works for you. As nutritionists, we're part of the coaching collaborative at Lipedema Simplified. So we are here to help you. You don't have to do this on your own. And I think this picture depicts, you know, we want to be there holding your hand to help you through this. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can get help and support through Lipedema Simplified. We do offer one-on-one coaching. Some people like that so that they can just get, you know, absolute dial into their particular situation. But new in 2023, we have just introduced small group coaching. We've just had our first group come through, and I can actually see in the chat here some of our participants.
I think 3 at least. Yeah. Lovely to see you all.
It was so wonderful to work through this in a group setting. I think there's some real power that comes from doing this intervention with other people that you know are going through the same journey, because you can ask questions, you can bounce off them. You know, what happens in a group is that people all come to it with different questions, and there may be questions that you don't even think to ask, but someone else does, and you're like, oh, thank goodness they asked that, and it can be really beneficial. Now, small group coaching is a way of testing out how keto works for you that's different to just buying a pre-recorded program. It's very, very much about following along with what the group needs. These groups will be like small in number so that you can get individual attention. It'll help you work out what your next step is. Someone just asked, do small groups push keto only? So we use keto as our initial intervention, but it may not necessarily be the only intervention or where you necessarily need to stay up. We suggest starting with this keto way of eating and just seeing what sort of benefits you get. But yes, it predominantly will be an experiment in testing out keto. What it helps with is, you know, there's, I guess, accountability. You know, we kind of check in each week. How are you doing? What's working for you? Where are you having some challenges? And it really is, you know, on many levels cost effective. Our next group is starting just in a week's time. This small group will be up to 12 people. In a small group coaching, you'll get 3 one-hour coaching sessions, and they will happen US Sunday evening. And then we have 3 one-hour Q&A sessions. We also have a private Facebook group where you can be asking us questions. You can, you know, post concerns, and we will be able to respond to you. And I think the most amazing part of all of this is you get 6+ hours of coaching from us for $197 US, which is actually the equivalent of 2 45-minute individual coaching sessions. So you're getting a whole lot more support, a whole lot more personalized intervention, going through this process with a whole group of other people that are doing the same thing, so that you can really bounce ideas around. And we've had such a great experience with this last group we've had. So we're really, anyone that's thinking to themselves after listening to this, maybe keto or trying out keto is my very next step or my next puzzle piece to get in place, sorry, excuse me, this would be a great way of going about it. At the end of the 3 weeks, you will really have been able to get your head around what keto looks like, get your head around how you're going to do it. What we found in the last group is some people were ready to jump in both feet, right, on day one. And others were like, just need to kind of work out how this is going to look, how it's going to work with my family. And, they're ready to start. They may not have even, done a whole lot of interventions other than experimented around the sort of the edges of this, but they know what they're going to do when they do get started and they know how to go about it. Did you want to add anything to this, Jill, in terms of
that's perfect, Carrie? Yeah, perfect. Excellent. And I know that actually you, me, and Catherine, who's in the background driving this for us, being our technical co-pilot, we've all got a hard stop. We've got buckets of questions. So for those of you who are in the Keto for Lipedema Facebook group, I think this is where we'll answer the questions. If you're in our other Lipedema support face group, can you come across and join the keto one? And then we're just answering them all in one place. Of course, the thing is, within the groups, these are exactly the sort of questions, we'll have we'll thrash it out. I've done so much experimenting with milk. I've been through all the things. I've tried oat milk, rice milk, almond milk, coconut milk, cow milk, sheep milk, goat milk. I did see camel milk and cream diluted with water, coconut cream diluted with water. And so this is the thing, is I've worked this journey, and if you're curious about just milk, this is a whole in-depth conversation we can have. And again, the answer for different people is going to be different. Like I'll fully admit, almond milk is fine in coffee and hot chocolate, awful in tea. If you're a tea drinker, it might just be that almond milk, you're not going to drink it because it tastes like rubbish. Well, to me it did. So, and sometimes it's just those little practical things. But this is, I guess, the whole point of why we're there and why we're all together. And we can all learn from these really simple practical things. It may not, if somebody is a little bit further along and they're doing some tweaking, somebody who's new to it can hopefully avoid those pitfalls by, we all learn collectively. And you and I, even as practitioners, Carrie, I know that we learn new things every single day. And that's part of the real delight of having this as a vocation. And we learn from everyone too, because part of it is we learn how different people with different bodies navigate food differently. There we go. So,
So unique. Catherine's waving. I think she's going to tell us we have to kind of wind it up because
we're winding down, but I just wanted to say what a wonderful group, what fabulous questions and comments. This is wonderful. We've been looking for the right formula to give you all support. And this is beyond anything we've ever. It just came with you. You have two of the best experienced coaches on lipedema and lymphedema and nutrition. So go ahead and sign up. This is how you sign up, and they'll be starting next week.
Yeah. Because usually it's like, okay, I want to do something. We're glad that the opportunity is to come up. But if you think this is something you want to do, but it's not quite the time is right now, please just reach out to us so that we can make sure you're on the wait list. We can let you know when it will be running again. Hopefully we're going to run it every month, that there'll be this opportunity. But we would encourage you, if you're feeling like, yep, I've got to do this, just do it. That Nike swoosh. Just do it. See how your body responds and then tweak it from there. That really is so important. You'll never know if you don't test it out. We're going to wind it up now. All of the questions, we'll go back through and respond to them in that, like we said, that Keto for Lipedema Facebook group. So sign up if you're not part of it. We'll make sure all of these responses come out in the next, 24 hours, Jill, so that we can
we're going to be busy, aren't we, Carrie? I have copied all the questions. We're going to have to divvy them up and do half each or something like that. But we will try and get to absolutely the bulk of them. But some of them, again, we could only answer in quite a general way without talking to you and sort of like, well, what have you tried and what do you like? So, and that's the whole point of why we do the small group coaching, is so that we can have, it's an actual conversation rather than just a one size fits all that we just put on you. It's unique for everybody.
Well, thank you so much, ladies. And if you're on the fence, jump. This is the right thing for you. Bye. Have a great week.
Thank you all.